the mightiest beast of the world. Fenrir. Even the gods fear his power. But now, a chain is forged, not just any chain. Magic, sacrifice, and a secret lie within it. The gods must test their courage and cunning to bind the unstoppable wolf. Watch closely, because this moment will push the limits of strength and wit. Who will prevail? Fenrir or the gods? Brace yourself for an epic clash that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Good evening, and welcome back. Tonight, we drift northward, into a landscape shaped by ice and flame, by silence and thunder, by gods who knew they would fall and acted anyway. This is the long breath of Norse mythology, a story that begins before time learned how to count itself, and moves steadily toward the burning horizon of Ragnarok. Along the way, we will walk with Odin, who traded an eye for understanding, with Thor, whose hammer steadied both sky and soil, and with Loki, whose cleverness stitched disaster and necessity together so tightly they could not be separated. We will cross the 9 worlds as the old poets imagined them, from the bright courts of Asgard to the familiar fields of Midgard, from the high branches of the world tree down through its roots into shadowed halls where even gods must lower their voices. These stories are not simply about beginnings and endings. They are about balance, about beauty that does not last, and about courage that is chosen even when the ending is already known. Wherever you are listening from, whatever hour holds you, whether you've come to rest, to wonder, or to let sleep arrive gently, I'm glad you're here. Let the world slow its grip. Let the old words do their quiet work. Now, let us begin. Before land learned its name, before sky arched overhead, before time learned the patience of mornings and nights, there was only Ginnungagap, the great yawning space. It was not empty in the way we think of emptiness, but unshaped, waiting, listening. To the north of that vastness lay Niflheim, a realm of mist and deep cold, where ancient springs flowed beneath ice and sent out rivers of freezing water. These rivers were called Aliviga, and they crept forward slowly, carrying frost into the open gulf. To the south burned Muspelheim, a world of living fire, guarded by the flame giant Surtur, whose sword would one day outshine the sun itself. When the warmth from the south drifted into the gulf and met the breath of frost from the north, something rare occurred. Ice softened. Drops began to fall. And from that meeting, neither planned nor guided, life stirred. From those melting forms rose the first being, immense and heavy, ancient even in his first breath. His name was Ymir, whom some called Orgelmir. He was no god. He belonged to the race that would later be known as giants, beings of raw force, older than law, older than craft. Ymir slept, and as he slept, life continued to spill from him without intention or care. From the warmth beneath his arms came a man and a woman, fully formed. From the meeting of his feet came another child. There were no vows, no halls, no names spoken over cradles, only existence multiplying itself because it could. As frost and flame continued their endless negotiation, another figure emerged from the ice. She was gentler, quieter, yet just as necessary. A great cow named Alhamla stepped forward, her hide rimed with frost, for streams of milk flowing freely to feed the giant who could not feed himself. From her, Ymir lived. Alhamla, too, required nourishment. She found it in the salt locked within the frozen stones. Patiently, steadily, she licked the ice. On the first day, hair appeared. On the second, a head. On the third, a man stood free, tall, whole, and aware. His name was Buri, the first of the gods. From Buri came Bor, and Bor took as his wife Bestla, a giantess, daughter of the old forces the gods would one day oppose. From this union came 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. With them, the story changed its tone. Where Ymir was mass without direction, and Ahumla was life sustained by patience alone, the three brothers carried intention, thought, choice. In them, the Norse imagination turns from growth to design. The world was no longer only becoming. It was waiting. These origins matter because they reveal something essential. The gods are not pure. The giants are not simply evil. The world is born from mixture, from shared blood and borrowed strength. Conflict is not an accident, it is inherited. Ymir continued to swell the ranks of the giants, filling the dark with bodies and potential. He was not cruel, but he was dangerous, like a floodplain without banks. And so the brothers chose to act. They confronted Ymir, not out of hatred, but necessity. When he fell, the stillness of Ginnungagap broke forever. His blood poured out and became the seas, drowning nearly all of his kin. Only one giant, Bergelmir, escaped with his wife upon a crude vessel, carrying enmity forward into the ages. From Ymir's body, the brothers shaped the world. His flesh became the land. His bones rose as mountains. His teeth shattered into rocks and cliffs. His skull was lifted high and set as the sky itself. 4 dwarfs were placed at its corners to hold it steady: Nordri, Sudri, Ostri, and Vestri, marking the directions before directions had names. Sparks from Muspelheim were gathered and set into the sky as stars. The drifting matter of Ymir's thoughts became clouds, moving slowly overhead like the memory of something once alive. Time, too, was given form. The sun was set upon its path, driven by a chariot, shielded so the world would not burn. The moon was given his course, carrying with him children taken from the earth, forever pacing the sky. Wolves were set in pursuit, not to destroy yet, but to ensure motion, to keep the heavens from growing still. Night rode first, dark and wise, scattering dew across the fields. Day followed, bright and steady, revealing what night had hidden. Rhythm entered the world, and with it, rest and labor. Finally, the brothers shaped a place for humanity. From Ymir's brows they built a wall, enclosing a middle land. They called it Midgard, a protected space between wild edges. Beyond it lay the realms of giants. Above it, the gods would later build their shining halls, connected by a trembling bridge of color and flame. The world was no longer raw. It was ordered, but never safe. And this was only the beginning. But for now, the walls built from Ymir's brows and the sweep of ocean marked the edges of human life. Beneath the earth, however, a subtler problem stirred. From Ymir's decaying flesh wriggled countless small things. The brothers looked upon them and, perhaps out of pity, or perhaps seeing usefulness, shaped them into a people of cunning and craft. These were the dwarfs. They dwell in stone halls and hidden caverns, devoting long years to the arts that hold the world together. Their names, strung in rapid chains in ancient lists, sound like hammers ringing on anvils: Vali, Aelio, Modsnair, and others who rule the deep places. The treasures of gods, forged or preserved, flow from their skill. In this first chapter of creation, they are hinges and cornerstones, keeping sky from sagging and earth from splitting. With heaven steadied and Midgard in place, the brothers turned their gaze to those who would walk upon the earth and watch the stars. On the sands of the sea they found 2 driftwood trunks, one ash, one elm, worn smooth by tides. From them, they carved the first humans, Ask and Embla. Odin bent close and breathed into them the spark that makes flesh live and speak. Vili gifted them mind and the quickness that awakens awareness. Ve granted shape, voice, and the power to perceive and feel. In some versions, these gifts are divided differently, but the meaning is the same: life, consciousness, and beauty were awakened. The gods placed Ask and Embla within Midgard, inside the walls that hold back the ocean of Ymir's blood. Here they would build homes, make laws, marry, mourn, sing, and, over time, fill the world with many voices. The brothers also ordered the measures of the heavens. They set the sun on its path so that summer would not swallow the year. They guided the moon so winter would not remain forever. They taught men to count nights by the phases of Mani and to read the passing seasons by the tilt of sunlight. Summer and winter were more than weather, they were the children of fathers with character, summer from a kindly wind, winter from a biting cold. The world itself had temperament, and humans were meant to respect it. Yet not all was neat and predictable. The gods understood that the new world balanced between memory and forgetfulness. They appointed guardians for the newly formed spaces. Wells bubbled under roots that would be named in time. Creatures took their stations. An eagle settled in the high air, something ancient gnawed at hidden roots, and a small squirrel ran messages, mostly insults, in the scold's fashion, reminding all that even in ordered worlds, chatter leaves its mark. These details, small as they seem, are threads in the larger tapestry of creation. They show that the makers aimed not to erase strangeness but to give it a place. One final touch remained, the naming of things. The gods walked over their work and gave names to morning and evening, to noon and midnight, to weeks and years, to rivers, streams, and fields. To name is to bind, to honor, to establish presence. Where other cultures might bless a loaf, the Norse blessed the world with words. Once spoken, names settle like nets of meaning, under which men may plant and poets may remember. Thus, the three brothers turned raw matter into a living, breathing world. They did not create from nothing. They cut, measured, restrained, and guided. They turned corpse into country, skull into vault, breath into people. What followed depended as much on vigilance and craft as on force. Giants remained beyond the wall, and wolves already tested the edges of the sky. Yet at last, there was a place where humans could stand, and a calendar by which they could keep their promises. At the heart of all stands an ash whose crown reaches the sky and whose roots drink from the oldest waters. The poets call it Yggdrasil. Its trunk is not a mere column of wood but a living axis. Its sap flows quietly, knitting the worlds together. When men say there are 9 realms, they mean 9 distinct spaces clinging to the tree like bees on a branch. The tree is more than symbol. It is habitat, road, archive, and drum. When it trembles, fate trembles. When it thrives, the world holds steady. 3 great roots extend outward. One reaches the plane of the gods, where the Norns watch beside the well of fate. Their names, Erd for what has been, Verdandi for what becomes, Skuld for what is owed, mark time and justice. They carve on wood, score living bark, mix water with white clay to preserve it, and bless the surrounding land so that oaths and promises may endure. A second root stretches to the frozen halls of the giants. Beneath it lies Mimir's well, a dark mirror storing every thought worth remembering. Odin once drank from it, offering an eye in exchange, and in later years, carried Mimir's head to consult its wisdom. It is a portable portion of deeper insight, rooted in both water and wood. The third dives into the misty underworld, where Virgilmere boils and snakes creep slowly among its edges. The greatest among them, Nhgr, gnaws endlessly at the root, a reminder that even sacred ash is mortal. From this root come rivers, fog, rain, and morning dew, the sweetness and bitterness of the world. Growth and decay are intertwined, and the tree shelters both. Yggdrasil houses creatures both ordinary and emblematic. An eagle perches atop, with the hawk named Verfilnir between its eyes. Ratatoska, the squirrel, scurries along the trunk bearing insults up and down, leaving scratches as he goes. For stags browse the leaves, their hooves and antlers marking the forest's rhythm. Dane, Dvalin, Dunia, and Duror. Below, Angnar and countless serpents chew and wriggle, feeding on and tending the roots. Yggdrasil suffers, but it also sustains. From the halls of the gods, the Aesir ride to the well of fate, sitting in judgment. Their horses are named, bright-hooved and ringing with syllables. Thor wades across rivers on foot rather than risk the rainbow bridge beneath him. The scene is precise. The gods do not drift. They keep appointments, settle disputes, and maintain the delicate balance of a world still learning to hold itself together. And the tree listens, as men do. In this telling, lore is not a set of cold tablets, but a living arrangement beneath living shade. The crown of Yggdrasil catches light first stolen from Muspelheim, set as sun and stars. Its leaves spread in ordered layers, more architectural than random. In some accounts, a stag named Afanir grazes on a tree called Lera above Odin's hall. From his antlers drips water that feeds Hvergelmir below. Scholars debate whether Lera is another name for Yggdrasil or a neighboring tree on the same sacred hill. The story's point remains: the economy of heaven closes its loops. What is eaten above becomes a spring below. What is drunk at the root rises as sap and returns to leaf. This is not allegory alone, it is the rhythm of farms and the pulse of a cosmos. Yggdrasil also serves as road and boundary. Travelers climb and descend its hidden ladders. Odin rides his eight-legged horse along unseen paths that wind through the boughs. Valkyries carry the fallen along routes that seem like wind but are branches. Dwarfs, who prefer stone caverns, reckon distances by the nearest route. Elves favor light filtered through the crown, shaping glades bright as pearls. Giants see the trunk as a wall to test, and test it they do. Every crossing in these tales is a crossing of bark. The health of the tree is a public matter. When it thrives, fields bear fruit, ships return safely, and children are born on time. When bark is stripped, snakes gnaw faster, or the Norns are hindered by summer fronts, famine and sickness follow. The poets put it plainly: the ash groans. It stands and speaks without words. Even the gods cannot pretend not to hear. In the far future, its shaking will carry warning for all. Not yet. For now, the Norns still sprinkle the white water, still mend the bark, still advise the gods who sit beneath its shade. The tree's name carries a story. Yggdrasil means the steed of the terrible one. Yggr is a title of Odin, acknowledging that he can inspire and frighten alike. Drasil means horse. The name recalls the terrible initiation when Odin hung for 9 nights on the windswept tree to learn the runes. In that ordeal, the ash became a mount that carried a man beyond himself. The runes carved from that moment are not letters alone, they are contracts with the tree, instructions for wood and water to behave for a time. Doctrine lives in the living trunk: care, vigilance, and balance. Fate is not a blind wheel, it is 3 women who tend bark and calendar alike. Evil is not a caricature, but a gnawing dragon that cannot be persuaded. Hope is not a slogan, but water drawn from a clear well and poured again on the rough trunk every morning before the gods sit in judgment. Thus, Yggdrasil stands, a vast ash binding wells to weather, lore to leaf, and memory to breath. The 9 realms orient themselves around its roots and boughs. The rainbow bridge touches one limb like a ribbon. Halls of gods, dwarfs' caves, and human fields all recognize it as center. The story will soon move beyond its branches to walk these realms one by one. But first, the tree must be understood. The Norse cosmos is not a tidy ladder of heavens and hells, it is a living arrangement upon and within the great ash. Scholars speak of 9 realms, but the poems leave room for mystery. Paths curve, borders drift. What matters is relation. Each realm has function and temperament, together forming a cosmos that rewards courage, respects oath, and remembers debt. Asgard rises in the high reaches, where air is clear and the ground rings with iron shoes. It is the stronghold of the Aesir, a court where law, war, and poetry share a table. On Idavol, the gods meet in council. There stands Gladsheim, a many-benched hall of judgment, and nearby, Velasjaf, Odin's silver-roofed seat. From Halid's scarf, his high chair, Odin watches the workings of the worlds. Valhalla rises there, too, with its 540 doors and rafters of spears, a hall for chosen warriors who spend their days at sport and their nights feasting beneath shields that gleam like fish scales. Heimdall keeps vigil at the foot of the Rainbow Bridge, his hearing so keen he can catch grass growing or wool thickening on a distant sheep. Asgard is not paradise, but a camp trained for fate. Vanaheim lies at the same height in another quarter, home to the Vani, gods of sea, fertile fields, and wise treaties. The peace after the First War bound Aesir and Vani in kinship, a union written into the topography. Nord dwells by the shore in a hall called Noten, where the sound of oars and smell of pitch are constant companions. Freya, lord of fruitful weather and prosperous seasons, moves freely between Vanaheim and Asgard. Freyja presides over a field called Folkvanga, hosting the worthy dead with generous hospitality. Vanaheim speaks softly and grows abundantly. Its power is patient, its authority upheld by gifts and fairness rather than iron. Alfheim is a bright realm, where light seems to rise from leaves as much as sky. Light elves dwell there, fairer than sunlight to behold, quick to music and indifferent to metalcraft. Older verses tell that Alfheim was given to Freyja as a coming-of-age gift, marking that prosperity and gentle increase have their place among the gods. Where humans encounter elves, the air itself seems to pause. Alfheim teaches that beauty is not luxury, but duty, grace is law. Midgard holds the middle. Its wall rises from Ymir's brows, its moat is the blood-spilled sea. Here men live, their deeds short but earnest. Jormungandr, the world serpent, circles the rim, tail in mouth, a living belt that both threatens and protects. In Midgard, humans learn measure, to count nights by Mani, days by Sol, and seasons by light. They learn when to sow and harvest, and how to keep faith, for law without memory is only noise. The gods walk among them, testing that the wall is still needed and the men still worthy. Jotunheim stretches across cold mountains and iron rivers. Giants dwell there, not merely as brutes, but as ancient powers with rights older than men. Some are coarse, some grave and handsome, many wise. Strongholds like Utgard house kings who pose riddles and illusions capable of humbling even Thor. The boundary with Midgard is not only geography but temperament, a line between settled speech and stone and storm bluntness. Yet kinship runs here, too. Frigg's friend and rival is a giant. Hunters and gods are often bound by marriage and alliance. Jotunheim is the necessary adversary. Without it, courage and cleverness would stagnate. Nidavellir, or Svartalfheim, lies beneath the earth. Caverns branch like roots. Dwarfs keep their forges here, masters of fire and form, their memory for contracts longer than a winter night. Their names roll in catalogues, recited by skalds as if warming their tongues before song. From their anvils come golden rings, ships that fold like cloth, shining swords, and hammers that return to the hand that throws them. Scholars debate whether the dark elves are the same as dwarfs or a neighboring folk. The poems leave the answer deliberately unsettled. What is certain is that this realm teaches temperance and patience. Nothing there is made in haste. Every good thing must be struck, cooled, and struck again. In the far depths broods Niflheim, where breath hangs in mist and sound travels poorly. From the well called Hvergelmere, rivers rise, their first names harsh as curses, creeping beneath rim ice until they spill over the edge of the world in a glitter of knives. Swarms of snakes inhabit this frozen quarter, led by the ancient eater Nidhogger, who gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil and reminds all folk that even beginnings decay. Niflheim is not malicious, it is endurance and cold reckoning. It is the part of the world that cannot be charmed. Muspelheim, by contrast, blazes in flame. Sparks rise like flocks of starlings, and at its frontier stands Surt with a sword of fire glowing through bone. The first stars were taken as sparks from this furnace and set in the high dome of the sky. Fire is both tool and judge. It gives light to calendars and destroys what has not been built with care. Muspelheim waits. It does not negotiate. It does not forget. Hel, also called Helheim, lies down a hard road beyond the Golden Bridge. Later, Hamod will ride that path with news in his mouth, returning with a demand that cannot quite be met. The realm is named for its queen, Loki's daughter, half fair, half corpse pale. She receives those who did not die in battle or beneath a shield. Her hall, Eljuni, offers hunger for a plate and famine for a knife. The threshold is a drop that stills the heart. The river Gijor runs there, crossed by the bridge Jalabru, whose glow is chill. A maiden named Mogu guards the crossing, asking questions sharp as spear points. At the cave Nipaheli, a hound named Garm smells souls as they pass. On the shore of Nastran stand the twisted dead, spines of the faithless dripping venom onto the ground. Yet most who go to hell are not villains. They are ordinary dead, dwelling in shadow and remembering the taste of air. Helheim is somber, not spiteful. The 9 realms are not stacked neatly. They weave through one another, touching at edges that shift with mood and season. Paths connect them. Bifrost links Asgard and Midgard, bright as wet silk, strong for daily passage but not for a full charge by a storm god, who prefers to ford rivers on foot. Mountain passes thread Midgard into Jotunheim, where wind bites like a small knife. Hidden wells gape on certain nights, letting a traveler step from forest to hall of antlered masks. Dwarfs insist on runes to seal safe conduct above ground. Elves accept no toll but demand exact courtesy. Even the gods keep routines. Each morning they ride from Asgard to sit at the first root, delivering judgments that hold across worlds. When they venture farther, they assume other names and test hosts for kindness, or at least brisk honesty. Across all realms, rhythms sweep in unison. Day follows night in a wheel that misses no spoke. Sun and moon are pursued by hunters who close but never catch. Winds climb from deep cold, descend with salt in their hair. The sea rises and falls. Snow builds in the north, rain warms the south. Yggdrasil drinks at its roots and breathes with its leaves. The 9 realms do not merely neighbor one another, they interweave. This is why sagas may move from farmhouse to giant hall without apology. The farm and hall are always neighbors. Balance is not peace at any price, but a set of relationships renewed daily by action. Gods hold the center through oath and wisdom. Giants test claims at the edges. Humans honor hearth and kin. Dwarfs craft objects that bind intentions into reality. Elves remind all that light must fall on what is made, or it will not endure. Cold demands thrift, fire demands discipline, death demands honesty. When each receives its due, the worlds hold. When any is slighted, the ash groans. This map explains why a Midgard fisherman thanks a god of Asgard for a fair wind from Vanaheim, leaving a coin on a stone because a dwarf once mended his net clasp. It explains why a poet looks to the night sky and feels it inhabited, or why an old woman mutters a charm at a doorway as if the wood could hear. Nothing is only itself. Each realm lends something to the others, and every debt will one day be repaid. In the youth of the worlds, when Yggdrasil still gleamed with fresh sap and Bifrost shone with wet brightness, discord came to the high field of the gods, not with a horn or a charge, but in the quiet tread of a woman. Her name splits like light through a prism. Some call her Gullveig, gold drunk, others bright flame speaker. She entered the Aesir hall with a smile like a secret, and a craft both desired and feared. That craft was cedar, a sorcery of threads and spirits, of coaxing growth, bending fortune, of seeing what is about to ripen and making it bear. It was household and boundary magic, answering to a will not always measured by iron. At first, the gods marveled. Halls glittered, purses filled with astonishing speed. Words could land softly or bite without a raised voice. For a time, the Aesir were delighted apprentices. Then they saw the demands. Cedar asked that someone sit apart, enter a trance, risk posture, find value in unexpected places, and name desire without armor. The Aesir, people of law, spear, and measured song, judged it beneath them, even as they could not stop using it. The old poem of the wise woman says they tried to end it simply. They hurled spears, burned the woman in their hall, 3 times to be certain. Each time she rose from the ashes, smiling as if untouched. Names in these tales are states of being. If she is Gullveig, gold speaks. If she is air, shining speech refuses to die. Some forces do not vanish because one prefers order. They vanish only when balanced by lawful strength. The Vani had taught her craft and claimed her as kin, old neighbors of the Aesir, keepers of fruitful field and fair wind, negotiators of peace. When they learned of the Aesir's attack, their anger was deliberate. No messenger was sent, war was prepared. The first spear flashed like changing weather. The first war of the gods began. No poet gives dates or standards. The battle is signed on the world itself. The high field's walls were shaken and split. Spears lay like reeds after a flood. The Aesir were strong in the open, the Vani subtle in countering. Aesir sang charm songs that hardened heart and sharpened edge. Vani wove subtle spells that softened iron and sowed confusion. It was not a contest of brave and coward, but of keeping. Aesir maintained order with oath and iron. Vani sustained abundance with gift and craft. Neither could fully overcome the other. Seasons passed in their offices. Summer came, winter followed, seed failed in some places, and grew in reckless abundance in others. Currents shifted along the shores. Nets that had never once returned empty rose heavy with fish, and then, by the next moon, brought only froth. The war had touched the household gods of field and sea. Men felt it in their bread, in the weight of their nets. When they asked the skalds why, they were given a truth harsher than comfort. When high things fight, low things pay. The gods cannot injure one another without the change running through the stems of wheat and the bones of cod. The Aesir called for parley. The Vani consented. They met between their realms on a plain with clear sight and little cover, for even gods prefer not to be ambushed while discussing honor. There, weapons were set aside and words spoken without shouting. The Aesir admitted they could not erase Seer and could not live as if desire and luck were absent from order. The Vani admitted that field, womb, and wind required a house able to withstand storms, and a court to settle envy into fair measure. Each side could tell the other what was flawed. and each acknowledged that neither could do without what the other offered. They agreed on peace. Peace among divine houses is not a shrug or a handshake. It is ritual and binding. Both sides stepped to a great vat and spat. Spittle is intimate, carrying the breath of life and the food that made that breath possible. From it was shaped a being. He rose tall, calm, mild-faced, and was called Kvesa. He walked between both households and spoke in ways that settled thought. He never lacked an answer because he knew how to ask, and he understood that no single perspective holds a whole world. Kvesa was not a tragedy, not yet. He was a living treaty, a seal upon the realms. To cement this covenant, the gods exchanged hostages, honored guests, not prisoners, pledged to live as kin. From Vanaheim came Jord, master of coasts, trade, and the patient temperament of the sea. With him came his children, Freya, who carries the warmth that wakes seed and the luck of fair bargains, and Freyja, who bears the full mastery of seer ever entrusted to a friend of the Aesir. From Asgard came Honi, tall, noble, quick to decide, and Mimi, keeper of a mind deep with counsel. For a time, the arrangement prospered. In Asgard, the presence of the Vani brightened fields and blessed marriages. Freyja laughed, and ships came home. She taught a craft the Aesir had once refused and built a hall called Sesrumnir, large enough to shelter all who sought true comfort. In Vanaheim, the sword songs of the Aesir were admired, and Honir's swift decisions pleased those who had long weighed the fine shades of agreement. With Mimi at his side, Honi spoke like a man well rested and widely read. But the Vani were not infinitely patient. They noticed that when Mimi was away, Honir's counsel stalled. Decisions halted. He would look at a ceiling or a knot in the table and defer. The Vani believed they had been given a figurehead, a fine horse that would not pull unless the groom stood close enough to smell the bit. They acted decisively. They cut off Mimi's head and sent it back to Asgard in a sack. The Aesir received it with grief that burned without smoke. Odin took the head, anointed it with herbs, sang over it, and taught it the art of remaining awake. The head did not rot. It spoke into Odin's ear as it had once spoken to Honi. From that day forward, Asgard had a counselor who needed no chair. If this seems gruesome, it is meant to teach that wisdom is dear. What is worth keeping often requires care that looks stern to the soft-hearted. The death of Mimi ended Honir's experiment in Vanaheim. The Vani did not call for vengeance. They renounced their anger and accepted the cost as paid. Peace endured, balanced by Njord and his children living among the Aesir and by a shared understanding that had never existed before. Kvesa continued to wander, answering every riddle, a living treaty with a voice. Years later, two dwarfs would slay him and brew from his blood the mead that grants poetry and speech, which Odin would steal for gods and men, a later tale, for now secondary. The point is that peace had been made, its seal walking the roads in sandals, and the two households of gods had become one pantheon. The lessons of this war flatter none. The Aesir misjudged a power because it made them uncomfortable. The Vani punished deceit with a deed that could not be undone. Both sides learned to accept the gifts and strengths of the other. Ships found better winds, courts found surer words. Eyes learned to honor a magic that works through attention and patience. The Vani acknowledged the need for walls that can hold when cold bites and hunger eyes another's grain. The world prospered because strength without growth starves, and growth without strength spoils. Poets place a final scene as quietly as a good meal at the end of a long day. The gods sit together on Idavol beneath Yggdrasil. Odin's one eye is steady. Freyja's Brisingamen necklace glints. Njord describes a sandbar shifting with every storm. Frigg asks a question and receives a tender, practical answer. Thor snores discreetly after roast and cups too many, while Tyr watches the door and smiles. Someone asks a riddle, Kvasir laughs before speaking. It is the sound that remains after a war that no one could truly win. The war did not end with a trumpet or a heroic charge. It ended with recognition, clean as the north wind, that neither household could do without the other. The Aesir brought law, oath, and song to steady courage. The Vani brought abundance, fair weather, and the patience that makes fields and people prosper. They stepped onto a plane between their realms, set down their weapons, and sealed peace in a way that could not be faked. They spat into a vessel, from it arose Kvasir, calm and bright-eyed, a keeper of balance. Where he went, quarrels were settled without force. He understood the grain of things and spoke with it, not against it. He belonged to both houses at once, and to neither alone, the right condition for a true peacemaker. Dawn broke pale over Asgard, and the last day of the deadline gleamed cold across the stones. The builder's breath came in steam, his arms shook from labor, and yet the wall remained incomplete by a single course. The gods stood along the line, silent, their faces masks of judgment. Freya's eyes reflected both relief and sorrow. The sun and the moon still hung in the sky, untouched by the mason's hands. Loki stepped forward. Quiet, deliberate, a spark in his gaze, he spoke only a few words, yet they carried through the ranks of gods and across the heights. A bargain cannot claim what the law of cunning denies. The builder's hands fell empty. The mason cursed the wind, the snow, the moon, and his vanished stallion. All night he had labored, and yet, the impossible demand, help denied, aid forbidden, strength alone insufficient, had undone him. The gods did not rejoice, for triumph had not come by force. They only acknowledged what balance demanded. Freya stepped from the ranks. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the stones like a warm wind. The wall stands because it stands. The world is held because the world cannot be taken by fear or greed. Let this be remembered, cunning and strength are partners in measure. The mason slunk from the hall, his pride bruised, his prize forever lost. Yet no one struck him down, no spear cut him. He had failed, and in that failure, the covenant between gods endured. Asgard's walls, though unfinished at the final course, held firm enough to mark a boundary, to give time for watchmen and hornblowers, to slow calamity and let vigilance breathe. The story of the mason passed into song and caution. Children whispered it beside hearths, and poets carved it into staves, that no power can take what is bound by law and by craft, that even the mightiest must heed conditions written with care, and that cleverness without wisdom is a perilous path. Thus the first great fortification of Asgard was built, not by conquest, not by fear, but by the quiet shaping of limits and the stubbornness of horses who choose their own way. And through that lesson, the Aesir and Vani remembered that the strength of the world is measured as much by restraint as by force, by patience as much as by the power of arms. And so the covenant endured, balanced and breathing, a world where the blade might defend, the blossom might bloom, and the eye of every god watched the earth without envy, without haste, without forgetfulness. On the final day of winter, the stranger's anger had reached a fevered peak. He cursed the wall, the terms of the contract, and the company that had whispered laughter behind their hands. Yet beneath his rage, his true nature revealed itself. A frost giant, a Rithitha who had cloaked his immense power in the guise of a patient, diligent worker. His mask slipped, and at last his enormous form towered before the gods. The Aesir knew what must be done. Thor strode forward with measured steps, the weight of the world in each motion, lifting Mjolnir, the hammer that never missed. One strike shattered the giant's skull like thin ice breaking on a winter lake. The body collapsed amid the carefully set stones, and the echo of the blow carried across the high fields. The wall, now mostly complete, stood tall and flawless, save for a few gaps at the crown that the next season's labors would fill. Asgard had its fortification, Freya kept her freedom, and the sun and moon continued on their ordained paths. But the story did not end there. Months later, a grey foal followed Loki back to the high field. Eight-legged and calm as the wind itself, it carried the assurance that no mortal or god could overtake it. It was no ordinary foal, it was Sleipnir, born from Loki's cunning and the stallion Svadilfari, who had been lured away by a small, spirited mare from the birch grove. Odin accepted this strange gift silently, and from that day forward he rode the steed to places no other mount could reach, over mountains, across seas, even into the shadows of the worlds below. The gift of trickery had become a treasure. The story, like a ledger with two columns, recorded both the danger avoided and the cost paid in ways that could not be measured in gold or glory. The lesson was clear. Contracts must be drafted with precision, counsels taken in haste demand repayment, and strength must be ready when cunning has overreached. Order is built not only of clean hours and measured stones but also of vigilance, patience, and the willingness to navigate the art of the unexpected. Yet even as the wall settled, mischief stirred within Asgard's gates. Loki, restless as a spark leaping across dry straw, crept behind Sif as she slept and sheared her golden hair. Morning revealed the act, and Sif stood ashamed, her honor seemingly undone. Thor, rising like the turning weather, seized Loki and promised dire consequences unless her hair was restored to its former glory. Loki begged for time and escaped, descending into the deep forges of the dwarfs, where coal smoldered and anvils never cooled. He first approached the sons of Ivaldi, master smiths of silent labor. Loki flattered, bargained, and swore oaths that their names would echo in Asgard's halls if they could produce marvels beyond compare. The dwarfs, their hands deft and unyielding, drew gold as a baker pulls dough and spun it into fine strands. The first gift, placed in Loki's hands, fell like a gentle cascade of sunlight, the golden hair of Sif, destined to grow and shine, restoring her honor fully. But that was not all. The dwarfs forged two more wonders, Gungnir, Odin's spear that would never fail, and Skidbladnir, a ship broad and true, capable of sailing any sea yet folding neatly to fit within a pouch. Loki, never content, pressed further. He approached another pair of brothers, Sindri and Brokkr, sometimes called Atri, who labored with fewer words but a steadier rhythm. Loki boasted, wagered his own head, and claimed they could not surpass the sons of Ivaldi. Sindri laid pig iron on the anvil, while Brokkr kept the bellows moving without pause. Loki, transformed into a biting fly, pestered them relentlessly. Blood ran from Brokkr's hand and later his eyelid, but they endured. From the forge emerged three treasures. First, Gullinbursti, the golden-bristled boar, swift across snow, air, and sea, companion to Freya. Second, Draupnir, the ring that multiplies its own weight every 9 nights, a measure of abundance and the rhythm of time. And finally, Mjolnir, the hammer, perfect in its head and temper, though with a slightly short handle, a weapon the world needed even before it knew it. The dwarfs presented their works in Asgard. Loki laid out the hair, the spear, and the ship, while Sindri and Brokkr unveiled the boar, the ring, and the hammer. The assembly, seasoned in experience and wary of deceit, weighed the gifts with care. Mjolnir tipped the scales. In times to come, it would stand between Asgard and the ice-clad giants. Brokkr demanded payment. Loki consented his head might be forfeit, but his neck was not included in the wager. Justice, precise and creative, was served. Brokka stitched Loki's lips, silencing his tongue temporarily, leaving a scar that would remind all that speech is both a tool and a hazard. The gifts were distributed ceremoniously. Sif's hair took root instantly, golden and alive. Odin grasped Gungnir and used it to seal oaths that would never falter. Freya took Skidbladnir for all her voyages, and Gullinbursti became her faithful companion in dark winters and sunlit hunts. Thor lifted Mjolnir, feeling the finality of power in his hand, the hammer that would crush any giant and return to him unerringly. Thus, Asgard stood fortified, enriched not only by stones and iron but by the careful weaving of cunning, craft, and courage. Trickery had become treasure, vigilance had turned chaos into order. The gods learned that power alone is fragile, and that patience, ingenuity, and attention are the true guardians of a world that must balance strength with growth, law with luck, and force with subtlety. It would bless a cradle and a marriage bed with the same unwavering grace it carried in the fury of war. Odin laid it carefully on his knees, and for a moment the whole seemed to exhale, as if the weight of the world had been eased. The old verses delight in cataloguing the uses of these divine wonders. When Thor hurls the hammer, mountains shudder and remember the blow. When Odin casts Gungnir high before a battle, he consecrates the field, and fate itself tightens its weave. When Freya raises the bristled boar, even the distant harvests recall how to fill their grain jars. When Skidbladnir spreads its sails, it can carry a host of gods across any sea, yet folded. It slips beneath a cloak, and when the ninth night comes, Draupnir drops its golden brood, filling temple chests both literally and with sacred significance. When Sif walks beneath the morning, light dances upon her hair, and men remember that beauty restored is not vanity, but the mark of a household that has endured storms and emerged whole. It would be tempting to say that Loki learned a lesson here. Perhaps he learned a technique, a skill to manipulate the forges and cunning of men and gods alike. Yet even in this tale, where spite initiated the work, the outcome strengthened the realm. Asgard now possessed tools worthy of its charge. The gods themselves saw that craft is the equal of courage, that law without gifts is cold, and that gifts without law invite theft. The dwarfs returned to their subterranean halls with the satisfaction of masters whose hands had answered a boast with proof. Loki nursed his schemes in silence, his mind already plotting, already measuring vengeance in ways that would one day ripple far beyond Asgard's walls. In the evenings that followed, when councils were concluded and the roasted meat carved, Thor would sometimes set Mjolnir on the table, tracing its edges with a finger as if greeting an old companion. Odin would hold Gungs in the hollow of his palm and feel the heartbeat of time itself pulse beneath his grasp. Freya would call for Skidbladnir to be unfolded in the yard, letting its sails catch the gentlest breeze, marveling at the elegance of its construction. Sif would unbraid her golden hair, and it would fall like a river over her shoulders, shining with the quiet authority of resilience. In these moments, the gods resembled less the titanic figures of legend and more people who understood what it meant to safeguard a home in a dangerous, unpredictable world. Among all his names, there is one that rises whenever knowledge at a cost is the subject: All-Father. Not merely because he leads the assembly of gods, but because he devours counsel wherever it can be found, whether it comes in whispers or the roar of storms. Valor is plentiful in Asgard. Clear, penetrating sight is rare. Odin desired it above all. To claim it, he sought the oldest spring beneath Yggdrasil, the well kept by Mimi, whose wisdom endures like iron cooled in the deep waters of the earth. The road to the well is treacherous, twisting beneath roots that lead outward toward the lands of giants, where stone seems to hold its breath and wind comes thin. There Mimi sits, carved from the same enduring rock, a guardian who flatters none, who weighs the cost of knowledge against the curiosity of the seeker. The water he preserves is not a fountain for travelers, nor does it yield answers to the impatient. It offers patterns, subtle and exact, only to those willing to bear their weight. Odin approached, making his need known as a king might state a claim. Mimi answered as a keeper does, naming a pledge that would mark the bargain eternally. To drink of the spring, Odin must leave one eye. Without hesitation, he plucked it and placed it into the waters. The spring swallowed it, and in that moment, his vision expanded beyond the face. His one remaining eye now gazed forward, while the eye beneath the well looked into past and shadow. He drank, and the draught did not pour facts into him but allowed him to taste the growth of fate as it spreads like lichen across stone. He saw that counsel matters only if sought before the first spear is raised, and that even the wisest must pay a price that will not grow back. This sacrifice honed him rather than softened him. He understood, with a precision no other god had yet achieved, that the hidden grammar of the world is written in signs older than speech. Resolutely, he set himself to master them. He turned from feasting, from ease, and undertook a trial none among the gods considered. At the heart of the ash, he chose a bow of shadow and speared himself, giving himself wholly to himself. He hung for 9 nights and 9 days, eating nothing, drinking nothing, staring downward where wind gnawed at bark and roots drew cold from the depths. Old verses preserve his voice without embellishment. He says he hung on a tree whose roots no one knows. He was pierced, given fully to the god he would become. He gazed until he could see the shapes of power twisting below him like fish beneath a dark surface. These shapes were the runes, not decorations, not a simple alphabet, but living contracts between will and world, strokes capable of persuading wood, water, and iron to heed for a time. When he recognized them, he seized them, fell from the branch, and stood again on the ground, changed in a way that left even his closest companions wary. He taught the runes and their uses only to those capable of bearing them without folly. He reserved the hardest work for himself, charms for binding and loosening, for healing without touch, for buying wind for sailors when the sea is still, for cooling a fire on a friend's shield, for freeing a hostage without breaking a chain. Poems count more than a dozen such workings and hint at others unspoken, for the truly wise do not boast over much. To make his newfound sight serve the world beyond a single moment, Odin ordered his days around counsel. At dawn, he sent his ravens, thought and memory, to fly across the worlds and return at dusk to settle on his shoulders, whispering every detail of the day, what men dared, what kings promised, what strangers attempted along dark roads and bright seas. In the high hall, 2 grey wolves lie at his feet, companions in vigilance and quiet, sharing bread more often than he eats alone. Because he drank from Mimir's spring, Odin continued to attend councils in many forms, listening to women who perceive what is coming when others see only steam on a kettle, valuing truth given by those at the edges of the world who require no praise. He kept Mimir's preserved head nearby, consulting it not as a puppet but as an elder. A ruler, these tales insist, is not diminished by advice. He is magnified by discerning which counsel is precious and which is cheap. This knowledge did not make Odin gentle. It made him exacting, deliberate. When he sets a spear over a battlefield, he does so as one who understands the cost in mothers, in fodder, in time, and yet believes some strife cannot be postponed without worse harm. When he bargains with giants, he does not reach for his hammer first, not for fear, but because broken truces exact a toll from those who never sat in council. When choosing men for his hall, he selects not only the brave, but those who kept their oaths when it was inconvenient. Poets agree, the latter quality pleases him as much as the former. Among mortals, His worship reflects this character. Those who dedicate offerings to a branch in his name understand him as the god who perceives the edge between life and learning. Those who carve runes on axe halves or barn lintels do so in faith that order is not merely declared, it is carved. Those who whisper for guidance before a voyage or judgment bring him a portion of their effort, and he responds with attention if the request is worthy. Stern he may be, but never gloomy. Wisdom has a price, and Odin pays it, fully aware that the cost shapes the ruler as much as the reward shapes the world. If other gods prize contest or comfort or the glitter of gold, Odin prizes the moment just before a choice, when the air is clear and a man can see the path he must take. In that space, he reigns not as a tyrant, but as a master of the invisible weights that hold the worlds together. In the seasons that followed these sacrifices, the worlds shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a tide that bends the shore with patience rather than force. Judgments pronounced beneath the ash grew sharper, their edges honed by the memory of one who had paid for sight with flesh and thought with patience. Oaths sworn upon the sacred ring were asked with greater care, for every oath-taker felt the weight of its silent witness, as if the metal itself listened and recorded intent. The horns of the watchmen sounded no more often than before, but when they did, the assembly moved with a discipline born of countless unseen rehearsals, of attention to the joining of things, not the display of skill. It was not magic alone that held the center together. It was the careful tending of the threads that bind life, law, and work into a lattice that does not fray. From the first sip at Mimir's spring to the nights when wind and shadow taught him the runes, Odin had shaped himself into a ruler who understood that power without knowledge is a gloved hand that cannot feel the world's labor. He did not gather these gifts to decorate a legend, for Asgard needed more than stories or awe. It needed a mind that saw before others saw, and that paid the debts of understanding before others even realized what was owed. Peace had given the gods time to listen, and from that listening had come the living pledge of truce, a being who walked the worlds with answers that fit like keys into well-made locks. He did not argue, he clarified. He visited halls smoky with hearths, where rafters leaned dark and blackened, and caverns where iron sweated on stone and sparks fell like captured lightning. No riddle could defeat him. Because wisdom draws both admiration and envy, two dwarfs, Fiala and Gala, summoned him to their workbench and murdered him. They drained his blood into kettles and vats, blending it with honey to brew a mead so potent that a single draught bestowed poetry, scholarship, and the clarity to grasp the quickest thought. They named the vessels Or, Bodden, and Sun. From that hour, poets could say that verse flowed in the blood of Cassia, and learned speech could be called the draught of Or. Yet the dwarfs did not keep their deed secret. They boasted, then compounded their crimes. They lured a giant named Gilling to the sea and drowned him, and when his wife wailed, they crushed her beneath a millstone at the threshold, ending her grief in cold precision. Their son, Suttung, raged for justice. He seized the dwarfs in a boat and left them to the tide, which carried them away like driftwood. Yet they bought their lives back, offering Suttung the mead itself. He carried it inland to the mountain Nitjorg, hiding it in a chamber carved from living rock, and placed his daughter, Gunlo, as guardian, steadfast and alone. Odin heard of these events with the attention of a king who knows a threat not by rumor, but by its weight upon the world. He understood that this mead was more than a sweet drink. It contained the ordered fire that teaches the tongue to name truth. He resolved to win it for the gods and for those mortals capable of shaping words as they ought to be shaped. He donned a plain hat and a blue cloak and took a working name, Bolverk, doer of difficult deeds. On a summer day, he came to a hayfield where 9 men labored, their scythes sweeping the green waves from the meadow. Bolverk praised their cutting, then drew from his belt a wet whetstone. With a few short strokes, he made the blade sing. Each man begged to purchase the stone. Bolverk tossed it high, and in the scramble, the 9 men killed one another amid the grass. He walked on to the farm of Borgi, Suttung's brother. Borgi's 9 servants lay dead in the field, the season pressing on. Bolverk offered to complete their work if Borgi would ask Suttung for a single draught of the mead as payment. The bargain was struck. Bolverk cut hay and stacked sheaves tirelessly, as if he were 9 men in one. When the work was done, Borgi went to Suttung to claim the agreed sip. Suttung refused. He would not part with even a drop, for wisdom is earned with blood and must be guarded. Bolverk did not withdraw. He handed Borgi an auger named Rati and guided him to bore through the rock of Nipjorg. The first hole spat dust into their faces. The second hole gave no better welcome. Then Bolverk transformed into a serpent and slipped through the narrow opening. Borgi struck at him with the auger, but the serpent passed beyond reach, silent and fluid. In the chamber beyond, Gunnlo sat at her post, alert and alone, guarding the 3 vessels of mead. She had been trained to distrust. Odin did not attempt theft. Instead, he became a young man speaking with quiet gravity, requesting a place to sit and a word. Gunnlo granted both. He asked for a bed for a single night. She asked for a promise of respect for her solitude. He stayed 3 nights, singing of dawn on snow, of the steady kindness a careful hand shows to a full cup. He listened when she spoke of a mountain that does not sleep, and of duty that asks no praise. When the 3rd night ended, she opened the stoppers and granted him 3 draughts, 1 from each vessel. Odin drank, not a sip, but a vat, emptying all 3, though he had promised only 3 draughts. He changed again, becoming a great eagle, wings shadowing the stones like storm clouds. He beat the chamber with powerful gusts and rose into the sky. Suttung, sensing the theft, took eagle form to pursue him. The 2 raptors tore across fjord and field, leaving men shading their eyes in wonder, as if day had darkened at noon. In Asgard, the gods saw Odin's approach, belly full of a treasure that must not be spilled. They set vats near the wall, calling to him as sailors call to a ship before a gale. At the last moment, Odin crossed the rampart, flared his wings, and spat the mead into the waiting vessels. Suttung, baffled and defeated, fell from the sky and returned to his crag. Not all the mead reached the vats. A few drops fell along the way. Those drippings, the scholars say, belong to rhymers who mistake speed for skill, and to learners who hoard facts but lack sense. The remainder stayed with the gods to be distributed wisely. Odin did not hoard it behind doors. He poured from it sparingly, at the right season, to those who could carry the gift faithfully. A youth with patience received a mouthful. A woman who recited laws clearly enough that quarrels ceased received her portion. A farm boy whose verses kept men moving through sleet received a taste. A craftsman who carved runes on beams received a splash, and the whole seemed to hum under storm and hammer alike. If a skald asked and was turned away, it was not stinginess but prudence. To waste a vintage is a sin against the vine. In these stories, each figure teaches a lesson. The dwarfs show that craft without conscience can cost lives. The giant shows that grief can harden into avarice. Gunnlo shows that duty can temper the heart without dissolving it. Borgi shows that a man can be used if he will not say no. Odin shows that cunning in service of order becomes a harvest. Because of this theft, the North remembered words as work. The me did not make fools into sages. It raised the labor of the willing, made verses that could carry ships through black water, laws that could preserve a family through harsh winters, and historians whose lists were precise and alive. In halls where a skald pours out a praise poem, one can hear the echo of an eagle and the whisper of a woman who opened her hand to a guest, trusting that what is given in good faith can bless many houses. When night falls in Asgard and the benches grow quiet, a cup sometimes passes that is darker than wine yet brighter than water. Odin lifts it and peers into its surface as a farmer looks into a well, judging the day by its reflection. He drinks, and the hall warms a degree no half could supply. The next morning, a new verse comes to a young mouth in Midgard. A sailor speaks softly, honoring a dead friend with perfect words. A child repeats a proverb that rings like iron, saving an elder from a poor choice. Thus, the mead became more than a drink. It became a lesson, a living echo of vigilance, wisdom, and the care that transforms work into art and speech into law. The mead had traveled again along hidden paths where no road dares to show, secret ways that wind beneath the bones of mountains and slip between the roots of ancient forests. In this manner, the mead of poetry came to rest once more in the keeping of the gods, to dwell alongside the runes and the eye that sleeps in the deep well of water. Together they formed a triad, a set of pillars that bore the weight of Odin's will. He had paid the price, endured suffering, and stolen what was needed, and in each act, the result was identical. The world, a fragile weave of law, risk, and song, was strengthened, just a little, by his hand. Thor, protector of Midgard, does not linger long at a bench or hearth. He belongs to the noise of wheels, the scent of storms, and the roar of wind through open plains. When he travels, he rides a chariot drawn by two goats, Tangjosta and Tangrisnir, whose names crackle in the mind like dry wood snapping in a hearth fire. When night overtakes him in the wilderness, he slaughters the goats for his supper, strips their bones, and lays them carefully on hides. At dawn, he lifts his hammer, Mjolnir, above the remains, and the goats rise whole again, shaking their ears as if they had only dreamed their rest. There is a strict rule: never break the marrow bones. A poor farmer once learned this lesson too late. Loki had whispered temptation into the boy's ear, urging him to crack a leg for the sweet marrow. The next morning, one goat limped. Thor's eyes fell on the splinter, and though his scowl was sharp, he forgave the family, but took the children in recompense. These became Jalfi, sharp-eyed and quick, and Roskva, steady and reliable, who from that day ran at the side of the Thunderer. With Loki as companion, and Jalfi ever at heel, Thor journeyed eastward, beyond the high wall, into the lands of giants. He did not favor the rainbow road. Rivers and valleys suited him better, a habit of practicality and pride. The world beyond the ramparts was no void. Trees stood far apart in giant forests, the sky higher and more spacious than anywhere in Midgard. One night, they stumbled upon a hall, low of doorway, with no smoke hole. Grateful for shelter, they entered, though the hall smelled strangely, and the floor sloped as if built in haste. Before dawn, the building shuddered. The earth trembled beneath them, the walls groaned like the timbers of a ship at sea. Thor rose, hammer in hand, and found outside a shape that filled the valley with its vastness. A man so large that a dropped glove would appear to smaller folk as a house. The hall where Thor had slept was but the thumb of that glove. And the odor, the strange stench that troubled him, came from the giant himself, Skrymir, tossing aside the hall as if it were a cradle. Their meeting was neither friendly nor openly hostile. Skrymir spoke in a voice measured, unhurried, as if shouting were a waste of effort. He bundled his food into a bag and suggested Thor share the path. The company walked beneath trees so tall they seemed sown by titans. When evening fell, Skrymir tossed the food bag to Thor. The knot was bound with a spell of subtle cunning, refusing every tug. Thor pulled until his hands burned. He bit the thong, pressed every skill he knew into untying it, yet hunger made patience frail. Finally, Thor struck the giant's head with Mjolnir. Skrymir opened one eye and asked if a leaf had fallen. He rolled over and slept again. Midnight brought another attempt. Thor struck again, with all the strength that rings in poems, yet Skrymir stirred only to ask if a bird had dropped a twig. Toward dawn, Thor summoned every ounce of his power and swung the hammer with such speed that it blurred. The giant woke, rubbed his brow, and inquired if a nut had fallen from a branch. Then he rose, directed the travelers to a stone fortress called Asgard, and went on his way. Thor, noticing 3 deep dents in the nearby hill, understood that some magic had diverted his strength, and that to take offense would be wasted effort. He folded his anger small and went on. The fortress rose from the plains like a cliff that had assumed the duty of a sentinel. Its walls were so tall that Thor could not see the top from the shoulder against the stone. The gate was without latch, seamless to the eye. They searched and found none, slipping through narrow gaps as if their passage required neither force nor cunning. Inside, the hall held a company of giants, and at their head sat a king with a face like a winter sky. He named himself Utgriloki and welcomed the visitors with courtesy laced with steel. No guest would remain unless they could earn honor in a contest. Loki went first. He claimed he could eat faster than any other. A trough, heaped with roasted meat, was set. Across sat another, lean and calm, also named Loki. At the signal, they began. Loki devoured like a man seasoned by famine and feast alike. He reached the middle with one last mouthful in hand, claiming victory. Yet his opponent had consumed the meat, bones, and even the wooden trencher beneath. The king nodded. The stranger had eaten well, but not as fire eats. The lean Loki was in truth fire made flesh, consuming all in his path. Next, they turned to speed. Hugi, Thought, ran against Jalfi. The first race ended before it began. Hugi crossed the line while Jalfi was still far behind. 2 more attempts humbled the boy further. The king praised his courage but revealed the truth. Thought cannot be outpaced by foot. Thor faced the drinking horn. He lifted it, drained it, set it down. The level barely fell. Twice more he drank, and the ale still stood high. The hall murmured. The king, courteous and sharp, noted that many men had done better, few worse. Thor said nothing. Finally, the cat. Grey, long-backed, with cunning eyes, Thor lifted the creature. Its back arched like the roof of a hall. Paws seemed to stretch to the ends of the world. With straining knees, Thor raised only one paw. Laughter ran through the hall. Wrestling was the last trial. An old woman, Ellie, moved with stiff grace. Thor gripped her lightly. She bent like a reed in rain-swollen rope. He tried every shift, planting muscles and weight. She forced him to one knee. The hall clapped. The king ended the match. At dawn, the truth was told. Skrymir had been himself. The knot had been enchanted. Every contest woven with illusion, so that the thunderous strength could not undo the hall. Loki had feasted against fire, Jalfi raced against Thought, the horn had been joined to the sea. Thor had drunk so deeply that men noticed the shoreline retreat, a mystery afterward called Tide. The cat had been no mere creature of fur and claw, but the Midgard serpent itself, coiled in disguise as a house pet. When Thor stooped to lift a single paw, he forced the coils that girdle the world to shift ever so slightly, and the oceans whispered with tension. The old woman was not a mortal at all, but age made flesh, and no man at any hour could claim to have thrown her. Thor, white-faced with fury, gripped Mjolnir as if the storm itself had entered his veins. He stepped toward the king to strike a clean, decisive blow, ready to end all trickery in one motion. Utgriloki raised his hand, and the fortress with its towering walls vanished like frost under the first sun of spring. The plain lay empty, and the air was so clear that even the edges of distant mountains seemed to gleam. Loki and Jalfi stood still, understanding that some victories are only lessons in humility, and some defeats are measured refusals of hubris. Thor realized he had been measured by illusions so clever that, without them, the ground itself might have broken beneath his feet. Tightening the strap on his hammer, he turned west, aware that he had not truly won a single boast, but the giants had learned what kind of neighbor waits beyond the boundary forests. In the years that followed, skalds and storytellers by winterlight would recount this tale, and listeners would nod, murmuring that both strength and guile are needed to hold the Middle Lands. Thor awoke in his hall, hands reaching for the comfort that always lay within reach. The bed was empty, the weight of the hammer was gone. He groped for the square head, the short haft that fit his palm as if it had been carved from the same piece of fate itself. There was nothing. The hall rang with a silence that only true danger can forge. A world without Mjolnir is like a house with its door torn from its hinges. Thor found Loki, whose eyes understood at once that this was no matter for leisurely counsel. He spoke only the truth. The hammer was gone. Loki went swiftly to Freya and asked for the falcon cloak, the garment that allows a god to move like a gust from cliff to cliff. Freya did not ask why. She opened her chest and set the feathered cloak in Loki's hands. He shook it out, pulled it close, and in a heartbeat became a bird, his clever eyes scanning the lands below. The air took him eastward until the terrain grew broken and bleak, until he saw a burial mound with a figure seated upon it. The giant was a Wemu, weaving gold for his dogs and stroking the manes of his horses as though wealth were a kind of grooming. Loki perched nearby, speaking in riddles that passed for courtesy in a hard land. Awymar wasted no words. He had taken Mjolnir and buried it 8 leagues underground, where no hand of God might find it. He would return it only when Freya came to him as bride. The price was named plainly, as one might order timber for a new roof. Loki's wings beat once, and he turned like a spark over dry tinder for Asgard. Thor, upon hearing the news, did not respond with poetry or counsel. He went straight to Freya and informed her of the giant's demand. Her anger, fierce as a rising sea, filled the hall. She refused, and the boards themselves seemed to echo with her determination. The gods convened in council, heavy on their benches, disaster sitting among them like an uninvited guest. There is wit in Asgard, but not enough to face a world without the hammer. Heimdall, whose sight traverses all possible futures, spoke, "There is a way." Dress Thor as bride, place the keys of a married woman at his belt, lay the bridal necklace upon his chest, pull a high veil over his blazing eyes, set him beside a maid who can talk fast. Loki would be the maid. Thor grimaced. The halls would never cease their gossip if he wore a bridal veil. Loki replied that the halls would have no one to talk at all if Mjolnir did not return. The council agreed. No second plan existed. They dressed Thor with meticulous care. Freya lent the necklace. The women of Asgard adorned him with brooches and rings, enough to soften even a frame that had thrown mountains. A ring of keys was hung at his girdle, the mark of a matron whose house is vast. The veil was drawn, shading eyes that blaze like forge fire. Loki, the handmaid, tucked a knife in his folds, because even handmaids must hold some measure of cunning. They led the pair to the yard where the goat chariot waited. The wheels rattled, the sky tightened, and as they crossed from the known lands into the borderlands, a small rain fell, settling the dust of fear. Alma's hall loomed high and raw-edged. He came forth, grinning as if he had counted all his teeth. Benches were drawn, meat was roasted whole, fish laid on platters, vats of mead fragrant with clover and iron. The veiled bride sat, poised and silent. She ate with the hunger of 8 nights denied. An ox vanished before her, 8 glistening salmon were swallowed, and 3 barrels of mead were emptied. Awema marveled, thinking no woman could consume so much without dying. Loki, ever the smooth voice, explained that she had fasted in longing for this journey. Thrym's delight only grew. At the ceremonial moment, Awema leaned to kiss the bride and lifted the veil. His eyes met Thor's, embers burned in them, new and wild. Thor rose inside the wedding dress, fury and thunder coiled as one. He seized Mjolnir by the haft that had always known his grip and struck. The giant's crown shattered as ice under a hammer, the hall shook, and kin of the giant were thrown aside. The sister of Awema, who had sought gold from the bride, was gifted what Thor's hands provided. The hall emptied in a rush of broken benches, falling cups, and startled cries. Loki shed the maid's garments, moving with purpose, while Thor strode forth, hammer upon shoulder, leaving ruin behind. The chariot waited. The goats snorted and poured. The road, once long in fear, became short in triumph. The sky opened slightly. A first, gentle rain fell as if to wash away the dust of conflict. They crossed the boundary, the wall received them, and Mjolnir returned to its rightful place. The keys were hung again, the hammer secure at Thor's belt. No harp was raised in song of Thor in bridal veil, but the gods laughed privately, for courage is not always solemn. The story endured. The hammer blesses as it harms, it sanctifies a bed, a threshold, and a child in a mother's arms. When giants ask for the hammer as pledge, they acknowledge its sanctity, even if they would twist it to their gain. From that day, men placed little hammers beneath their shirts. Women asked that a hammer be laid upon the bridal lap. The tale passed into custom, binding people to remembrance. When Thor walked the sky again, his thunder carried relief as well as warning. The goat stamped at night, unbroken. The watchman on the tower breathed easier. The skald found his words again. And the fire on the hearth, once fierce and threatening, glowed like a friendly guest. Asgard slept its first easy sleep after storms of hammer and deceit. Dawn broke softly over gilded rooftops, and Thor stood in the wide courtyard, turning Mjolnir in his hands as if to remind it, and himself, that they were one, inseparable in thought, in intent, and in action. The air smelled faintly of pine and iron, the lingering perfume of the forge and the mountain winds. Around him, the hallways were quiet, and even the faint clatter of servants felt subdued, as though the world itself had drawn a deep, cautious breath. Loki's place among the gods had always been contested, a seat neither fully safe nor entirely damned. He had sworn brotherhood with Odin, drunk deep of the pledge that binds one life to another. Yet his blood flowed from the house of giants, twisted with cunning and mischief. His father, Farbauti, stood in memory as a storm shaper, and his mother, named Lofnor Nal in whispers, depending on who spoke, had given him a lineage that carried both brilliance and menace. Among the women of Ironwood, in forests far and uncharted, Loki had kept a bond with Angerboa, whose name spoke always of sorrow drawn near. From that union came 3 children unlike any others, births that read like marginal notes in the ledger of fate, warnings written in invisible ink upon the world. The first was Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent, too vast to be measured by the cord of any fisherman. He arrived small enough to hold in 2 hands, cold as the memory of Niflheim, and Odin saw not a garden snake but the outline of a problem that would one day encircle the earth. Without hesitation, the All-Father flung the young serpent into the ocean that girdles Midgard. There, it found home, sustenance, and a horizon without end. Time and tide stretched it long and clever. In the fullness of seasons, its coils would wrap the world until its snout met its own tail. The sea rose and fell with the slow rhythm of its breathing. Fishermen whisper of a white eye beneath the waves, and sailors swear careful oaths afterward. Songs recount the hammer lifted in a boat, an ox's head used for bait, tales yet to come. The second child was Fenrir, a wolf born with the shoulders of kings, paws too large for youth, and a hunger that knew no bounds. He was called Fenrir, Fenris wolf, and sometimes, in older songs, Fraudviter. At first, the Aesir did not strike him down. They judged that a foe kept in sight is safer than a foe nurtured in secret, and they attempted to tame him with patience and vigilance. Only Tyr, brave and steady, found courage enough to feed him daily, learning the rhythm of the wolf's breath, the weight of his gaze. Seasons passed, each rib of Fenrir a measure of time, and he grew with the force that made the air around the kennel taut as a bowstring. Old prophecies muttered by wise women foretold that he would one day break bonds no smith could forge, and that his vast jaws would close upon the highest god himself. The gods counted food, sharpened minds, and avoided speaking of the day that would come, though each heart felt the tension like the pull of a tide. The third child was Hel, a girl whose body told two truths at once. One side lived, fair and warm. The other side was blue-black as winter brews, still as a silent graveyard. Odin placed her in the far reaches of the world where cold springs rise and shadows linger. She was given dominion over a realm called Helheim, a necessary office to house those who die not by sword or spear, but by age, sickness, and sorrow. Her hall, Eljudnir, burned cold lamps. Her dish bore the name hunger, her knife the name famine. Her bed was sickbed, the curtains bleakly. Her servants, Ganglati and Ganglot, moved slowly as if their joints were forged from dusk. At the cave of Jalabru, the hound Garm bayed when a new soul approached. Beyond the river Gijor, a pale bridge arched, and a maiden named Modgard questioned each traveler, asking name and errand. Beyond lay the gate Helgren and the long, sunless fields where most of mankind would dwell. This was not solely punishment, but a place of keeping. The sting was memory, not flame. The wisdom of the gods shows in these arrangements. The serpent was sent to the outermost waters, where a belt is needed if Midgard is to hold. The wolf remained within sight, guarded, a decision that cost sleepless nights and later blood. Hel was enthroned in her essential office, keeper of the inevitable. These were deliberate moves, acknowledging that some forces cannot be destroyed, only placed where their work may be done without unmaking all else. Midgard's customs bear the imprint of Hel's realm. Shoes were buried with the dead so that the long road would not strike hard on bare feet. Coins, knives, or tokens were laid in hands, not as bribes, but to carry value into a land where worth is measured in remembrance. Names were spoken at thresholds, knots tied to make grief wait its turn. When bodies were sent to the ship or flame, folk whispered that the bright ones had called them. Burial rites became small lessons in respect and memory, a quiet acknowledgement of Hel's domain. Prophecy shadowed these children like a storm advancing. The seer's songs, bought by Odin with rings and attention, spoke of the woman in ironwood, nursing wolf kindred and sending them against the sky. The Midgard serpent would rise, spilling venom into air and water. Fenrir would shatter what no mortal or god imagined unbreakable. Hel would open her gates to those untouched by war, leading armies who never drew a sword. These events were warnings, markers along a road that the gods had already charted. Loki boasted not of these offspring. He was a father without cradle or hall, yet he did not renounce them. In secret, the gods acknowledged the bargains made with fate. Odin had exchanged an eye for vision, a part of himself for the runes. He understood the price of ignoring foresight. So the serpent remained in the ocean, the wolf under vigilant eyes, and the girl in her appointed seat. The world had been measured, forces of chaos contained where they could serve without unmaking the whole. Fenrir grew as if each season had become a bone, each moon a limb. The meat that fed him equaled the size of oxen, the water troughs carved from single logs. Even in summer, his breath missed none of its lessons. His eyes learned suspicion as a habit, and prophecy ran beside him as shadow beside a rider. One day, he would unhouse the highest god. The Aesir watched, choosing vigilance over destruction. Only Tyr placed his hand to the wolf's muzzle, bringing food with calm endurance, counting the cost with each motion. When Fenrir pressed deeper paw prints into the earth with every passing moon, the gods forged a test of strength. Dwarfs hammered iron into a mighty fetter, naming it ladning. Thick as a stonecutter's wrist, ribbed with cunning, it awaited the wolf's challenge. Fenrir opened his maw, and for the first time, it might have been a smile. The gods stood silent around the bound wolf. Fenrir's chest rose and fell like a hammer on an anvil. His eyes glowed yellow in the shadow of the dark lake, and the foam that spilled from his jaws traced lines across the moss as though marking a map of wrath. The wind did not dare pass through the island. It twisted and lingered at the edges, a cautious witness. Tyr knelt beside the wolf's jaw, hands steady, unshaken. In that gaze, he saw both a beast and a measure of the world, a creature of power too vast to ignore, too potent to release. Odin spoke then, his voice low, carrying the weight of foresight. "Fenrir," he said, "the world's balance leans upon your restraint and the vigilance of men who cannot yet see the end. Your fury is owed to time, and your chains are owed to necessity. Let this moment be remembered, not as cruelty, but as foresight, for the hours to come will demand it." The wolf lifted his head, and the hilt of the sword pressed against his palate, yet he did not thrash blindly. He understood, as much as wolves understand gods, that his strength had been measured, and that the magic of dwarfs had met force with something more subtle, cunning without malice, art without neglect. His gaze softened on Tyr, who did not flinch, and a low rumble went through his throat, neither roar nor growl, but a sound that would echo in the minds of the Aesir whenever they spoke of oaths and vigilance. Odin turned to the other gods. "Mark this well," he said, "for the wolf sleeps now, but his hour will come. The Midgard serpent coils far and wide, hell reigns in her halls, and this wolf waits in tether. Fate threads these lives through the loom of the world, and we have done what must be done to keep the web intact." Thor tapped Mjolnir against the stones, the sound ringing like thunder in miniature. Even he, whose hands had felled mountains and wrestled giants, felt the weight of the moment. "Let no man boast too loudly," he said. "Power without care brings only ruin. Even the hammer bows to patience and planning." Freya drew a breath, the falcon cloak hanging at her shoulder, and spoke softly, "All is well, for now. The wolf is bound, the serpent swims, and hell keeps the dead. Yet the world grows, and each day brings shadows closer to the light. The feast of gods continues, but our vigilance must not falter." Tyr's hands rested on the wolf's muzzle. "I have fed him, and I have seen the cost. None other could do this, none other could bind both honor and power in one act. Let all remember this as a lesson in courage, trust, and the price of foresight." The lake, dark and still, reflected the stars above as though the heavens themselves had paused to watch. The bound wolf became part of that reflection, a reminder that even when the world seems calm, the undercurrents run deep, and strength unmeasured can undo the work of ages. From this day forward, the sagas tell, Fenrir waited in shadow and strength, a silent warning to gods and men alike. The Norns marked his time, and the Skalds remembered the hands that fed him, the chains that held him, and the eyes that never faltered. Van, the hope born of restraint, ran in streams across the heather, whispering that even the fiercest power can be honored, contained, and turned toward the purpose of the world. And so the Middle Lands breathed a little easier. The rivers ran, the forests rustled, the children played under skies that could not yet know the day of reckoning. The wolf lay chained, a force held, and the gods walked their courts with quiet understanding. Vigilance is its own reward, and foresight, its own form of power. The price had already been paid, and the bargain, once sealed, was kept by all who had sworn to it. What raged behind the fence was no longer free to answer its own fury. The threat remained, breathing and watching, but bound by a restraint that shouted anger could not tear apart. When the gods returned to their halls, they did so without songs of victory. They passed through the gates like those who have done what necessity demanded and know better than to boast of it. No feast was called. No cups were raised. That evening, Asgard sat quieter than usual, as if sound itself had learned caution. Tyr walked among them with his sleeve pinned close, his loss plain to see and yet never paraded. His smile remained, steady and unbroken, and in the councils that followed, his words carried greater weight than before. Those who suffer for the peace of others speak with a gravity that no scroll or schooling can teach. The old laws, as they always do, added details afterward, fastening memory to place and name, driving pegs into the past so it would not slip loose. It was on the island called Lyngvi that the wolf had been honored before he was betrayed, and the lake Amsvartnir lay nearby, watching without favor or pity. The ribbon that bound him was lovely to look upon, pale as woven summer cloth, yet deadly to strain. Its name meant the open one that tightens. From it ran a chain named for the echoing stone, and at the far end a boulder held fast, known simply for firmness. Between the wolf's jaws a sword was set, holding them apart, turning his drool into a steady stream whose name men still murmur when they pray that courage might last one day longer. This is how memory works among the gods. It ties events to objects, to places, to names, so nothing drifts away unmoored. The wolf learned. And he waited. He lay in the heather, watching clouds move across the sky, counting years with a patience no shepherd could match. He understood that he had not lost merely because the gods were clever. He had lost because he himself had demanded a pledge, and one god had given it without hesitation. Such lessons cut deep. Such lessons grow teeth. The seers speak of visions sold dearly, glimpses of what waits beyond the present binding. In them it is said that the bonds will one day fall away as easily as ropes severed by a single clean stroke. The wolf will rise then, opening his jaws so wide that the lower scrapes the earth while the upper brushes the sky. Fate will meet him head-on, and a son will answer for a father, wearing a boot made from every scrap of leather men ever trimmed from their shoes. But for now, the island holds. For now, the ribbon does not fray. The watchman listens to the sound the sword makes between the jaws and knows it is not the sound of triumph, but of time bought at a high cost. The gods continue their work beneath the ash tree. They ride each morning to the road where the Norns bless the bark. They lay hands on shoulders, weigh hard cases, and speak judgments meant to keep the center from failing. Yet every feast ends with the same quiet unease, like a door shut against a winter night while the wind prowls outside, testing for a latch left undone. The binding of the wolf is not comfort. It is a delay of sentence, a promise to maintain the world until the day appointed. Among the shining halls of Asgard stood one brighter than the rest, whiter than new snow, cleaner than a priest's hands before prayer. Its broad gleam calmed the eye. Their boulder held court. Nothing unclean could cross its threshold. He was loved not only for his power, but for the way his presence steadied others. Gentle and fearless, husband to Nanna, father to Forseti, who weighs disputes until both sides nod, Balder was the bright center that kept anger from hardening into habit. When he began to dream of death, the benches fell silent. The dreams were clear and cold. He woke speaking names that made even Odin sit straighter. He told of a dark hall beneath the roots of the world, where a high seat stood waiting and a bench had been freshly washed. He could smell the sharp chill of the place that receives most of humankind. Frigg gathered the gods at once. She would not argue with fate directly, she would remove its permission. She walked the worlds as only a mother can, taking oaths from fire and water, from iron and all metals that remember the forge, from stone and earth, from sickness and poison, from beasts on foot and birds on wing, from trees, vines, and every creeping thing. Each swore to do Balder no harm. When she returned and told what she had done, a great weight lifted from the hall. Relief turned to play. In the field before the hall, the gods tested their joy. They set Balder at the center and cast weapons to prove the world itself had bound its hands for love of him. Spears veered aside. Stones arced harmlessly to the ground. Swords rang flat against his shining form and left no mark. Arrows refused their targets, as if ashamed. Laughter rose, deep and genuine. Even servants joined in. This was not pride, it was thanksgiving shaped like a game. But vows are threads, and threads can be missed. In a nearby wood grew a young mistletoe, pale and small, lacking the obvious threat of oak or yew. Frigg had passed it with a smile, saying such a child of a plant needed no oath. Loki heard the tale as a guest in her hall and stored the kindness for later use. He had the gift of making harm look like a clever solution, until the moment after. He took the shape of an old woman and sat close to Frigg, asking softly if everything had sworn. When she mentioned the mistletoe, Loki thanked her gently and left with his head bowed, as if in sympathy. He found the plant clinging to a north-facing trunk and cut it with care. In his fingers it hardened, from twig to dart. He smoothed the point and went to find where it might be spent. That day the gods played again. All joined but Hr, Balder's blind brother, who stood apart with his staff, listening. Loki approached him kindly, placed the dart in his hand, guided his arm, and offered to aim so Hr could share the joy and not merely hear it. The kindness was flawless. Hr cast. The dart flew straight and struck Balder in the breast, entering him as hunger enters flesh. He fell like a tree when the axe has bitten deeper than expected. The field stopped breathing. No sound came as the gods ran forward. They called his name. He did not answer. Frigg knelt and gathered his head into her lap. Odin stood rigid, his eye as empty as a winter sky. Thor gripped his hammer until the haft creaked. The light had gone out. What followed was duty, grief, and the slow turning of an age already leaning toward shadow. The ship was brought, the rites begun, and the world itself seemed to tremble as Balder was borne to his final fire, while somewhere, quietly, fate counted what remained unpaid. Nanna, his wife, came forward when they uncovered the body, and grief moved through her as winter moves through an orchard, silent at first, then absolute. She did not cry out. She simply fell, as blossoms fall when frost takes them all at once, and her spirit slipped away without struggle. They laid her beside her husband upon the ship, as if even death understood that what had been joined in light should not be parted in shadow. Odin stepped forward then and placed upon Balder's breast the ring Draupnir, the gold that multiplies itself, dropping 8 bright copies every 9th night. It was a gift sent beyond breath and fire, wealth offered to the road no living man walks. Frigg sent tokens ahead to Hel's queen, small mercies meant to soften a welcome that no love could cancel. Freya led forth the stallion that had carried Balder through peaceful years, and they set it upon the deck with saddle and harness, so that no journey, however final, would begin without dignity. Thor lifted his hammer and hallowed the pyre, striking not in wrath but in order, so that the passage would be lawful and the way made straight. In the press of sorrow, a dwarf named Lit ran too close to his feet. Grief has weight, and anger has momentum. Thor kicked him forward, and the dwarf fell into the flames and perished, a small life taken by the careless edge of divine pain. Torches touched the pitch. Fire climbed the timbers. The great ship Ringhorn slid forward, caught the water, and drifted out burning, a moving sun upon the sea. A black line of smoke drew itself across the sky, marking the farewell of Asgard to its brightest soul. Nothing followed it. No song could. Yet grief still leaves work undone. There remained the matter of ransom. Hermr, swiftest of Odin's sons, stepped forward and asked for Sleipnir. He mounted the grey horse whose hooves find footing on air, sea, and sorrow alike, and he rode out without ceremony. For 9 nights he passed through vales where nothing grows, over slopes where light feels like a rumor rather than a fact. On the 10th night he came to the river Gijor, cold beneath a sky that does not warm, and there a pale bridge arched like bone across the flow. A maiden named Moga guarded the crossing and asked who passed so loudly upon the dead road. Hermr named himself and said he sought Balder. She told him the dead had crossed the day before, riding hard, and that Hel's hall lay farther north. He urged Sleipnir on. At Helgrind, the great gate, he touched the horse's flanks, and Sleipnir leaped so cleanly that iron did not ring. Within the hall, Hermr found Balder seated in the high place prepared in his dreams. Death had not diminished him. The honor around him was plain, like frost on stone. Hermr stayed the night, and in the morning he begged Hel to release Balder back to those who loved him. Hel listened as one who keeps accounts, not grudges. She answered that Balder would be released if all things wept for him. If even one voice refused, he would remain. Hermr prepared to ride. Balder gave him words for the gods and sent gifts from Nanna to Frigg and Fulla. Hel returned Draupnir to Hermr, telling him to give it back to Odin, proof that the bargain had been real. Sleipnir leaped the gate again, and Hermr rode home with hope bound carefully in his hands. Messengers spread across the worlds. They spoke to gods and giants, to light elves and dark, to mountains and orvanes, to rivers and trees, to beasts and birds, to sickness and crawling things. One by one, they wept. Stones sweated. Leaves fell before their time. Waves darkened. Even iron seemed to sigh. Believing the condition met, the messengers returned by the long road. On the last day, they came to a cave where a giantess named KK sat alone. They begged her for a tear. She answered that she would weep dry tears at Balder's funeral feast. The living and the dead pleased her equally. Let Hel keep what she had. Nothing moved her. Those who read riddles with sharp eyes later said KK was Loki in another skin. Whether truth or accusation, the refusal stood. Because one voice withheld sorrow, Hel's word held. Balder would remain. The benches of Asgard began to feel cold from far places. The hunt for the maker of this harm sharpened into duty. Loki fled Asgard as men flee a fever. He built a house on a lonely mountain with 4 doors, so he could watch every direction. By day he hid as a salmon in a pool below the cliff. By night he sat by the fire, weaving a fine net to pass the hours. When he saw the gods approaching, he cast the net into the flames. But ash remembers shape. The gods found its outline. Kvasir understood. They wove a net from the ashes and cast it above the pool, drawing it down again and again. The fish slipped beneath, darted for the sea. Thor waded into the torrent and caught the tail. That is why salmon narrow toward the end. They bound Loki and took him to a shadowed cave. There, punishment was set that the earth itself remembers. His sons were brought. One was changed into a wolf and tore his brother apart. From the brother's entrails, the gods made cords and bound Loki to 3 stones until the bindings hardened like iron. Skadi fixed a venomous serpent above his face. Sigyn, his wife, sat beside him holding a bowl to catch the poison. When it filled, she rose to empty it, and in those moments the venom struck. Loki twisted in pain, and the earth shuddered. This is how the North remembers earthquakes. So Loki remained bound. Balder remained in hell. Nanna remained beside him. Draupnir returned to the hand that had given it. Asgard kept an empty chair and a grief that did not thin with time. From then on, the world leaned. Omens gathered quietly. The ash groaned more often. The Norns poured their water with heavier hands. In Midgard, old women dreamed of wolves running along the sky's edge. Men who had never feared the sea muffled their oars. Then came the winter the seers had promised. Fimbulwinter arrived without warning, snow from every quarter, wind that shaved the skin. 1 year passed, then another, then a third, without summer. Frost sealed doors. Crops failed. Worse than cold was the forgetting of kinship. Brothers lifted axes against brothers. Fathers counted old slights as debts. Hospitality thinned to a knife at the door. In the heavens, the wolves closed the distance. The sun vanished in a sudden bite. The moon followed. Stars fell loose like sparks. 3 roosters crowed to wake the armies of both sides. The earth shook. Mountains split. Bonds failed. On the Black Lake, the ribbon burst without sound. Fenrir rose and opened his jaws until earth and sky were caught between them. In the sea, the great serpent moved, and the ocean climbed its body in hills of water. The delay had ended. The sea beyond the river of waiting had reached its shore. Venom steamed upon the serpent's tongue, and the breath rising from its throat thickened into a cloud that fouled the air itself. At last, Muspelheim stepped fully into the tale it had been saving since the first spark learned its hunger. From the south came the rider, leading a host of fire giants whose armor gleamed like a forge floor just struck and swept. In his hand burned a sword brighter than the noon sun, a blade that did not merely reflect light but seemed to create it. He set his feet upon the rainbow bridge and advanced without haste. Bifrost shuddered beneath him, fractured, and broke away in flaming shards, each falling piece marking the end of a promise that had lasted as long as peace allowed. From the north, black sails gathered where ice meets open water. A ship moved there that no living carpenter had shaped. It was Naglfar, built in hell from the nail parings of the dead, every plank creaking with the weight of lives that had ended unfinished. Prim steered it through fields of broken ice, though other songs claim Loki held the oar and guided the vessel himself. The argument does not matter. What matters is that the ship came, heavy with those hell had kept for this road. Behind them, the dead marched over land with faces pale and uncomplaining. Giants left their stone citadels. Frost, once an ally, now became banner and bridge. Trollkind, Wolfkind, and the restless hosts from the rim of the world moved toward the plain long named for this meeting. Yggdrasil trembled from root to crown. The eagle at its summit screamed. The 4 stags stamped and tore at bark already strained by ages. Below, Enya gnawed with renewed fury, as if hunger itself could drag the world tree down into the dark. Dwarfs stood in their doorways and moaned in the slow language of stone. In Valhalla, benches rattled and spears beat together like hail on a roof. The Einherjar rose. They had trained each day and died each evening for this hour. Valkyries tightened buckles and calmed their horses. And at the far end of the broken bridge, Heimdall lifted the horn no one wishes to hear. When he sounded it, the note traveled every road between realms. No ear misunderstood it. Odin rode once more to council. He went alone to Mimir's well and bent his head over the water where his lost eye gazes back from the deep. He did not ask for victory. He asked to be fully awake. Then he returned, buckled armor dark as a raven's back, took up Gungnir, and called his sons, his fostered heroes, and the friends of his hall. Together they passed through the Golden Gate. The field waited. Its name was Vigia, and old measures say it stretched 100 leagues across. There was room for everything that would arrive. From one side came gods, chosen dead, and allies bound by old loyalties. From the other came fire and frost, stone and serpent, wolf and the anger of the sea. Omen weighed so heavily in the air that even the brave spoke softly. Some tales say that before the clash, a final sign appeared. In the shadowed world beyond, a whole few had seen before shone with gentle light. Gimli, promised long ago, stood open, not to halt the battle, but to remind what might endure beyond it. On the far horizon, another hall showed its teeth, roofed with serpents, poison dripping from its beams. Between promise and refusal, the hosts advanced. The last moment stretched. Tyr tested the strap on the stump of his right arm and smiled with the calm of one who understands payment. Freya stood without his true sword and lifted a hunter's weapon instead. Thor weighed the hammer and drew breath like a man planting his feet on stone. Heimdall waited for a face he knew. Vyre stood apart, silent, looking down at his boot, stitched through ages from every scrap of leather ever cut from human shoes. Frigg watched a shadow that had once been her child and said nothing the wind would keep. Then the ranks met. Cold light lay on mail and antlers fixed to helmets. The ash shuddered overhead, and the ground answered like a buried drum. Odin rode first, ravens circling, wolves at his stirrups, Gungnir leveled toward the widest mouth ever sung of. Fenrir loomed, Menere bristling with sparks from the broken bridge, eyes cold as distant stars. The spear flew. The wolf came through it. Odin struck again, and the jaws closed. The All-Father fell without a cry, and for a breath, the field itself seemed to pause. Vyre moved. He stepped into the wolf's shadow and set his heavy boot upon the lower jaw, the leather thick with the work of ages. He seized the upper jaw and tore until bone gave way and the throat opened. In some tellings, he drives a blade home. In all of them, the truth holds. The son avenged the father and stood blooded and silent. Thor faced the Midgard serpent. Its coils rose like hills, venom pouring black and hissing on shield and stone. Thunder walked with the hammer. The sky shook. Mjolnir fell, and the serpent died. The sea withdrew. Thor took 9 steps and fell, poison whitening his face, his hands still on the short haft as if refusing to let go of duty. Tyr met the hound that had broken free. They tore each other down, and the ground where they fell was left bare by unspoken agreement. Courage honors courage, even at the end. Freya stood before Surtur with horn and lesser blade. Once he had given his true sword away for love and never called it back. Fire pressed him, and he fell. This is the lesson he leaves. Gifts given without foresight return as hunger. Heimdall and Loki found each other on broken ground. The Watchman and the Trickster closed, wounded each other, and fell together. Their quarrel ended quietly, almost unnoticed beside greater deaths. Over all of it, Surtur swung his blade. Fire leaped free. The field became ember. The sky split and fell away like old bark from a dying tree. And in the deep quiet that followed the last clash, the world held its breath, waiting to see what, if anything, would rise from the ash. Mountains split as if struck from within. Rivers lost their patience and boiled. The great supports of the world gave way, and the seas ran past the edges of the tale, no longer held by shore or name. Bifrost had already fallen, and now even the roads men had walked since the first winters were unmade. Dwarfs groaned from their stone doorways as rock softened and flowed like grief-given weight. At the ash tree, eagles screamed, and the dragon at the root tore and tore until sap ran dark and heavy, a sorrow the tree could not keep inside itself. Fire climbed the crown. Smoke rolled along the trunk. Leaves curled inward, not to hide, but because there was nowhere left to turn. The three women by the well did not lift their bowls again. There was no bark left to tend, no wound that could be bound. To the north, Naglfar cut across the last waters and ran aground on a shore that had forgotten its own name. At the prow stood the helmsman, staring into a fire that was no sunrise. In the south, the sword of flame grew until it filled the firmament, vast enough to be seen even with closed eyes. One by one, the final cries ended. Heat claimed what sound had spared. The wind rose once, only once, and then even wind was gone. Old verses end the age without mercy. They do not soften the fall. They say simply that all which could burn did burn, and all which could drown did drown, and the long contest in the old hall was finished. Enigma flew from the dark with dead men in his claws and blood upon his teeth, and found nothing left alive to fear him. The world sank. Waves folded over it and smoothed it flat. Stars that had fallen lay cold in a night that had no room for maps. That is how the age ends. And yet, within smoke and sea, something remained unspent. A hall of light had shown itself to those who still breathed. A word had passed quietly from mouth to memory. Not every seed dies beneath ash. The last work of fire had also been a clearing. The final sound was not a scream, but a long hiss, as water met iron and neither yielded easily. In that hush, something like a breath gathered. The dark remembered dawn. Smoke thinned. Ash settled. The sea lay calm, as if holding itself still. Then green returned. Grass came first, a pale veil over slopes that had been cinders. Shoots followed, careful and bright. Rivers ran again, clear this time, and their sound carried no fear. An eagle crossed a western ridge and rode the spray of a waterfall, searching pools as it had done before men learned to count seasons. The world had ended in fire and flood. And yet the same world, washed, sharpened, quieter, began to speak again. The sun rose. Not the old one, hunted down by a wolf, but her daughter, equally bright. Poets say the child had been hidden before the chase was won, and when the sky reopened, she stepped forward without haste. The chariot remembered its way. Day returned without apology. Night followed, gentler than before. Time found its rhythm again, like a lost bell rediscovered on a familiar neck. On the plain of Idavola, the survivors gathered. They were few, but they were enough. Vaya came from the place where the wolf had fallen, his boot heavy with the deed that would always be spoken with the held breath. Vali stood beside him, born for vengeance and finished with it. Moi and Magni arrived leading Thor's goats and carrying the hammer that had outlived thunder and venom alike. It bore now the weight of two futures. Honir came slowly, staff in hand, still listening for echoes from deep water. And from the shadowed ways returned Balder and Hr together, reconciled at last, released when the old bindings loosened with the breaking of almost everything else. The sight of the brothers standing shoulder to shoulder steadied the air. They looked upon the field where councils had once been held and smiled as men smile when they step back into a house after a hard winter. In the grass they found the golden game pieces from the first days. No one had buried them. Time had simply misplaced them. Now the earth returned them gently, as if to say that play belongs beside rule, and that joy must be part of order if order is to last. The survivors laughed, and it was the first sound since the battle that carried no smoke with it. The land promised better manners. Fields bore without plough. Grain filled its heads without the sickle worrying its neck. Fish moved in rivers as if fear had been only a long dream. Wind came in from the sea smelling of salt, not ash. The sharper edges of the old world remained, but they no longer pressed forward to prove themselves. Beyond gods and men, a smaller story had kept itself safe. In a thicket called Hosmimir's Wood, two humans had hidden while fire and water finished their work. Elif and Lifrasir they were called, Life, and the one who clings to life. Morning dew fed them. When the earth's breathing calmed, they stepped into the light of the new sun without fear. From their hunger and their joy, a people began again. The halls beyond arranged themselves anew. One shone with a light not borrowed from flame, waiting for the just. Another offered ale that did not sour and company that did not thin. A third gleamed for those who love craft and patient hands. But not every house was softened. A dark hall remained, its walls woven from the penalties of broken oaths. Poison still fell there, and the speaking of names was itself a sentence. Even in renewal, warning was kept. The world tree had suffered beyond measure, yet from its blackened trunk came tender leaves, and from its crown ran a whisper meant for centuries just being born. The wells did not forget themselves. Memory endured. Becoming endured. The quiet dew endured. Fate was not erased. It was repaired, its edges smoothed where they had once cut too deep. When dawn follows ruin, a question always rises: what of the old enmities? The poems do not answer fully. They say only that the dragon flies once more with a body in its claws, and then they stop. Perhaps because hope must share space with caution if it is to remain honest. Odin did not walk in that morning. His memory did. Men set a spear upon a wall and said, "This is for the one who paid for truth." They did not worship absence. They kept counsel, which is the same honor. Thor's steps no longer shook the ground, but the hammer at his son's belts set a pattern of protection that needed no words. Freya was not seen at the first plowing, yet the rain came on time. Baldur's seat glowed, and people spoke more gently in his presence. Aicha's hand rested on the rail, and none doubted that justice could be blind and still exact. Tyr was missing, but when the first law stone was raised, his name was cut deep into it, because courage in service of measure cannot be buried under ash. Among men, small customs survived. A bride asked for the hammer's blessing. A craftsman scored wood to turn chance aside. A sailor poured ale into a river and asked it to be a road, not a grave. Memory traveled like seed in soil. A singer told the children the old tales and did not tidy the endings. He added one last lesson, spoken softly. When the world ends, keep your eyes open. When the world returns, keep your word. And by slow degrees, the place of councils filled again, with voices that no longer needed to shout. The world that followed learned slowly how to sit upon the fields of Idavol. Not as conquerors, and not as rulers eager to prove themselves, but as keepers of balance. Riders were sent out along the first roads, not with threats or fire, but with judgments meant to last through winter and memory alike. In time, they learned to measure their days not by triumph, but by harmony. A good day was one when the golden game pieces were put away because labor had gone well. A better day was one when those same pieces were taken out again, and there was time enough for play without guilt. They did not chase perfection in the shape of men or gods. Perfection had burned once already. What they sought instead was balance, the same balance the old gods had reached for when they poured water over living bark at dawn, knowing it would freeze by night and thaw again by morning. The world reshaped itself along an older design, but under a gentler light. Grain ripened without debt. Carved halls stood without fear of flame. A smith paused over a narrow seam, smiled, and knew it would outlast his own hands. A widow stood beside a river, spoke her husband's name, and felt no breath of the underworld at her back. Children asked why summer carried the scent of honey. And someone answered that long ago, a tree had survived fire and flood because 3 women refused to let it die. A world may end and rise again. But stories do not survive by chance. They move through mouths and memory, through wood and stone. They change their clothing as time demands, so that their heart may remain. When ash cooled and green returned, memory became the final craft of the North, practiced with care, patience, and devotion. Before ink, there were voices. Poets stood in smoke-darkened halls where ice clung to the eaves and turned deeds into sound. They taught listeners to hear ships as horses of the sea, gold as the bed of serpents, blood as the drink of swords. These were not riddles made for cleverness. They were disciplines, ways of binding many meanings into a single breath. Bragi, son of poetry, is named among the first masters. Egil carved runes to heal and to harm, then sang over them so that sound and mark would hold together. Story and spell walked side by side, without apology. Runes themselves guarded the threshold. The elder forms and the younger were cut into bone and stone, into grave markers and amulets worn against the skin. Short prayers appear again and again, pleas for Thor's blessing. On some stones, a small hammer is carved where later ages would place a cross. On others, a winding charm runs like a narrow river along the edge, promising aid to anyone who reads it aloud without stumbling. These were not long myths. They were doorways. Through them, the larger stories breathed. Some memories were pressed into gold thin enough for a hand to hold. Small foils show paired figures meeting in ritual embrace, echoes of sacred union meant to keep field and household in balance. Iron plates from island forges show a one-eyed wanderer, a bent-back trickster, a strong man holding a square-headed tool. One weathered stone shows a face with sewn lips, preserved by half ash long after polished halls had fallen. Stone spoke as well. Picture stones from Gotland show a man fishing with an ox's head for bait, a great coil rising beneath the boat. In northern England, a tall cross shows a struggle with serpent and wolf, and a rider on a strange horse. Christian hands carved it, yet the older battles remain visible, worn but unforgotten, proof that stories overlap when winters are shared. There were temples, once. A shining house at Uppsala, its grove heavy with fear. Sacrifices kept time with the seasons. In Iceland, a law speaker lay beneath a cloak and chose one law for one land, so families would not tear each other apart forever. After that, offerings retreated to barns and sea rocks. Public rites ended. The word that ended them did not end the stories. When fire and frost had spent themselves in the fields of myth, memory passed to scribes. On a kingless island, men wrote in their own tongue. A thin book gathered visions, insults, bargains with giants, and the words of kings not yet born. Within it, Odin speaks of the spells he learned upon the tree. A dwarf names night and day until dawn enters the hall. The book arrived late to our hands, missing leaves like a broken plank in a familiar bridge. We cross it anyway. Another book taught poets their craft, disguising old gods as lessons. It explained why the sea may be called a god's blood, why gold sleeps with dragons, why kings grow like trees heavy with rings. Bishops approved its beginning. The rest refused to forget. Not all memory rests in ink. Days of the week still carry the names of gods far from the fjords. Fields and groves still whisper whose they once were. Laws shifted, for bad blood, find old seasons, yet poets did not rebel. They explained. They placed the gods in a past that felt distant enough to be safe, and close enough to matter. Folklore kept other doors ajar. Riders pass through winter nights. Fires burn at midwinter under new names. Traditions fold, not break. Archaeology finds what hands drop without meaning to: a child's toy, a scratched bone, a brooch worn by someone whose reasons are lost. These are not proof of fact. They are proof of warmth. At the end of the greatest poem, a seer speaks of halls for the worthy, then in the same breath warns of a dragon flying with bodies in its claws. Promise and warning together. That balance is the heart of these stories. The gods are brave and flawed. They swear oaths and pay dearly. They fall, and the world heals, only to need healing again. The telling asks for only two things: remember, and act as if your remembering matters. And so the North remembers. It remembers first through the mouth, in the old habit of shaping truth into images that can travel. A ship becomes a stallion that runs across dark water. A wave rises not as foam, but as a wall that tests resolve. Gold sleeps as a serpent. Blood drinks the sword. These kennings are not ornaments. They are anchors. They hold meaning steady when time pulls at it. The North remembers in stone, where runes were cut deep enough to bite. Marks made not to decorate, but to guard. A traveler's safety pressed into granite. A god's name scratched sharp enough to turn harm aside. Even when the hands that carved them were gone, the intent remained, humming softly beneath moss and frost. It remembers in books, patiently copied by men who bowed before a new altar yet could not let go of an older craft. Their ink served one god, but their discipline served many generations. They wrote carefully, not as worshippers of the past, but as custodians. They knew that skill itself is a form of reverence. It remembers in the names of places that refuse to be erased. Fields still carry the sound of Freya. Groves murmur with Freyja. Hills remember Odin even when churches rise nearby. Days of the week continue their quiet tribute, spoken without thought by mouths that no longer know why the names feel heavy. It remembers in proverbs passed between hands like bread. In warnings about pride. In praise of fairness. In the way courage is admired when it stands still rather than when it shouts. And it remembers in silence. In the hush that enters a room when winter announces itself, not with snow, but with wind. In the pause where everyone listens and no one speaks, because the season is older than argument. The story itself began long before memory learned how to speak. With a gap where nothing leaned on nothing. With a drip of cold and heat meeting. With a cow whose milk fed a giant. With a threat so vast it had to be unmade. Three brothers stood where there had been no standing place and shaped a world from what would have destroyed it. From flesh came earth. From bone, mountains. From blood, seas. From a skull, sky. And from sparks stolen from elsewhere, light. For now, the story rests elsewhere. It rests with children stepping carefully out of a thicket that once hid them from the end of all things, blinking into a light that belongs to them alone. With friends returning from the deep places, no longer enemies, smiling like men who have forgiven the night for being dark. With the hammer placed once more into steady hands, not as a weapon eager for thunder, but as a promise of shelter. The tale does not say the world is finished. It says only that it has been restarted. And it reminds those who listen, softly, without command, that memory is not passive. It is an act. Attending. A choice made again and again, so that when the wind speaks, something answers.